We're going to start with a bit of botany because I just really like science, and then some terminology, what's a save, harvesting, and preserving. This is what a flower looks like. I this is technically called a perfect flower because it has everything that can be in a flower, all the piece parts. Some flowers don't. Around the outside are petals, and beyond that, sepals. The sepals served as a case for the flower before it opened up. The petals are there, in this case, to be a showy display, advertising to pollinators that there is something here for them. When you have a flower that is wind pollinated, it doesn't have showy flowers because it doesn't need them. So things like ragweed and pigweed and corn, all of which are wind pollinated, may have petals, but they're almost invisible. They're missing or they're green and tiny. This is an apple flower. It has nice big flowers, big white petals to say, come and get it. The next row going in are what we call the male bits, each of which is a stamen and consists of a filament with an anther on top. The filament holds the anther up out of the flower. The anther makes pollen. Pollen is the male gamete, which is to say, it has half the genetic material of the plant, and we dub it male because we label things male and female. Inside that are the female bits. All together, that's called the pistil, and it consists, going from the bottom up, of the ovary, which holds what's going to be the seeds. Right now, it holds ovules or ova, and those are the female gametes. Each one is half the genetic material, and we dub it female. Coming out of that is a style, which is there to hold the stigma up above the flower. The stigma has a sticky bit on the surface that receives the pollen and fertilization happens. Also around the base of the flower, with some flowers, is this hypanthium, which holds it all together. But with some fruit, like apples, that's most of what we eat. The ovary becomes the apple core. The hypanthium is the big juicy thing around it. And we have selected apples that make big hypanthia, which you can discuss in the grocery store. My, what a lovely large hypanthium this has. And everybody will look at you very strangely. The point of showing you this is in part just because it's cool, but in part when you look at how the fruit develops, the only thing that is a genetic mix of the pollen and the egg are the seeds. The core, the core was the ovary, all off the mom. The hypanthium, all off the mom. So the only part that is a genetic mix are the seeds. That can be confusing because when we eat the fruit, it's a very predictable taste. It's going to taste like whatever plant we picked the fruit off of. But the seed itself might be a mix of that plant and something surprisingly different. Same species, but very different. Some flowers are perfect. The one that's often used in illustrations is a lily. It is a monoecious plant, which means the male and female are both on the same plant. And it has perfect flowers, which means the flowers themselves have male and female parts. And when we look at it, we can clearly see the 6 stamens around the outside, and they're long and have that orange fuzz on them. And then in the middle is one stigma and style. And you can see that this one has been pollinated. There are pollen grains on it. If somebody gives you a cut lily and there is no pollen yet on that stigma, pull off the anthers because the flower tends to bloom until it exhausts itself or until it gets fertilized. So when that cut flower gets pollinated, gets fertilized, it says, I'm done, and it stops blooming. It'll bloom longer if you can keep pollen off of that stigma. Then there are flowers or plants like birches and willows that are monoecious, male and female on the same plant, but they have separate flowers, male flowers and female flowers on the same plant. When you get really close up, you can tell which is which. Not that important unless you're growing vegetables. And I'll show you an example of that in a bit. And then there are dioecious plants like holly, where there are male plants and female plants. And the male plants only have male flowers, and that would be the top twig there, because you can see there's four things sticking out. Those are stamens. And the bottom one is from a female plant. And it has one thing in the middle, which is the ovary, stigma, and style. When you're buying a holly, they say if you're buying this for the berries, you need to get a female. Only the female is going to make fruit. When you're trying to save seeds, you need to find a female. Only the female is going to have seeds. This may be one step too far in the whole sciency thing, but the way things work is the whole DNA chunk in the flower gets split up by meiosis into half pieces, and half of it goes into pollen and half of it goes into ovules. And when they get together again, there's fertilization and you have a zygote, which is all of the genetic material, and life goes on. This I find really cool, and then we'll get back to saving seeds. The pollen grain itself actually is a cell within a cell. It's got two nuclei, it's got two cells. When it lands on the appropriate stigma, the outside cell will generate this pollen tube, which travels down the middle of the style and enters one of these ovules. The inner cell splits and travels down inside the pollen tube, goes into that ovule, and one of those two cells creates the live part of the seed, the germ, and the other one creates the meaty part of the seed, which is going to feed the seed until it germinates and for a little bit after. And all kinds of division and multiplication goes on. It's a beautiful thing. Anyway, terminology. A species is a group of plant that interbreed in the wild, and we call it the species. Are you looking for the species of purple coneflower, or are you looking for a cultivar, which is a cultivated variety? An interesting thing about this definition of species is that part of it is in the wild. So if you have two plants that are sexually compatible, and one developed in Japan and one developed in Oregon, they're considered separate species because in nature they don't interbreed. In your garden, they absolutely can. A cultivar is a cultivated variety. It's been named, and it's usually been inbred to some extent to have some particular characteristic that's different from the species as a whole. It may all be one color, or it may have petals that stick out instead of hanging down, or something like that. A cultivar can be open pollinated or hybrid. Open pollinated means if you breed two of them together, you get the same thing. So if you breed those two red 4 o'clocks, you get a red 4 o'clock. It's open pollinated. If you breed those two white 4 o'clocks, you get a white 4 o'clock because it's open pollinated. If you cross the red one and the white one, you get a pink one, and that is called an F1 hybrid. But at this point, you've broken up the inbreeding. So if you cross that F1 hybrid with anything else, you get quite a variety of different plants. Because color is such a simple gene in 4 o'clocks and in a lot of plants, what you get is going to be very predictable. But with other things like flavor or leaf shape or something like that, it's completely unpredictable. So for people who are puzzled about this, I tend to talk briefly about dogs because we understand dogs pretty well, sort of. A poodle is an open pollinated cultivar of dog. If you breed two poodles, you get a poodle. A Cocker Spaniel is an open pollinated cultivar of dog. Two Cocker Spaniels make a Cocker Spaniel. A Cockapoo is an F1 hybrid of a poodle and a Cocker Spaniel. And they are created because they are incredibly predictable, because both parents are sufficiently inbred. You know what that Cockapoo is going to be like, more or less, in terms of size and appearance and temperament and all of that stuff. But if you breed a Cockapoo with anything, what you have is a mutt. You have broken the inbreeding and you don't know what you're going to get. When you are saving seeds, this can matter a lot. If you are breeding the species, it's irrelevant. Species are open pollinated. You breed two of the species, you get a species. But when you're starting to talk about the cultivars, if you wanted to breed true, you need to start with open pollinated plants. A lot of the time in seed catalogs, they don't actually label something that is open pollinated. They may say OP, or they may just leave it blank. Hybrids are all labeled. They'll say F1 or F2 or hybrid or something like that. So you can tell that they are hybrids. The other magic word in there is heirloom. All heirlooms are open pollinated. They've been around for a good long time. And that's pretty much all we know about them, other than there's got to be something good about them or we wouldn't still be growing them. But there isn't a specific definition of, because it's been around this long, it's called an heirloom and that one isn't. One of the tricks with heirlooms is that they may not be unique plants. So anybody who grew a tomato in the Brandywine Valley in Delaware could call it Brandywine and sell it as Brandywine, but they may not be the same plants. And some Brandywines are a lot better than other Brandywines because of that. Some heirlooms are harder to start, have lower germination, lower yield, but great flavor. What I have found about them is that they are more site dependent than non-heirlooms. So I did an internet search at one point and said, what's the best tasting tomato? And a lot of places said Brandywine. So I tried growing it in my backyard. My Brandywine tasted like nothing. So it may be that I got bad seeds, but it's also possible that my soil is sufficiently different from the Brandywine Valley that it just didn't work. There is this thing called terroir, which is the flavor that the land gives the fruit. And when you have an heirloom, it has spent the last 50 years or 100 or however long in one location on the planet. And it does fabulously well there. But that doesn't mean it'll do as well here. So by all means, try heirlooms. But if they don't work, try something else. So save seeds because heirlooms are interesting and there's a lot more variety available if you go to all those weird local things than if you buy the top 10 tomatoes available from everywhere. Once you have grown it once and it worked well, you know it works here. You know it's well adapted for this location. Some cultivars from one year to the next, they no longer sell, and it's free. So that's all marvelous. If you buy seeds instead of saving them, you can grow new things every year. You can succumb to the instant gratification of going somewhere and just getting stuff. And you don't have to think about cross pollination and storing and starting the seeds. Because if you save the seeds, it's on you to turn them into plants. With some plants, you can just toss them on the ground and they'll do that. But with others, you need to start them inside. And that's a whole nother presentation. So to get viable seeds, you need the plant to be able to produce fertile seeds. You need that plant to get pollinated, and you need that fruit to ripen. Then you can collect the seeds. To get seeds that breed true, you need that plant to be open pollinated, or you're collecting for the whole species. You need it to breed within that cultivar, and you need a large enough population, which only affects a few plants in a meaningful way. For some reason, if you have fewer than about 200 corn plants, there's this thing called inbreeding depression, and the viability of the seed goes downhill fast, the vigor of the seed. But with most things, a few plants is enough. So most garden plants can make seeds, but not all of them. Ferns and mosses reproduce with spores, and that's a completely different biology. That chart I showed with the circles looks different with spored plants. There are seedless cultivars like watermelons and grapes. If the species is a single flower, like it looks like a daisy, and the cultivar you have has a whole poof ball of petals in the middle, it's gotten doubled or tripled, it's very likely that that flower is sterile. It's very likely that this is a mutation where the sexual parts were replaced with more petals. It can happen naturally, but you're not going to get seeds out of that plant. Some plants mostly make sterile seeds, and this ends up being a giant debate between growers and ecologists or environmentalists. For example, burning bush mostly makes sterile seeds, or butterfly bush mostly makes sterile seeds, but it makes millions of seeds. So even if 0.1% of the seeds are viable, that's still tens of thousands of viable seeds. So yes, it is mostly sterile, but it's also invasive. That's mostly worth keeping in mind, because if you're going to start with saving seeds and trying to start them, I wouldn't start with something that has that low a germination rate. It's just too frustrating. Then you need the seeds to become fertile. Some plants are self-pollinating, which means if you have one dandelion flower in the world and no bees, you will still get seeds. Same thing with peanuts and peas and beans and violets. Some flowers can be self-pollinating to some level, but if you want them to really fill out and have a full complement of seeds and therefore a full fruit size, they need a little bit of help from a pollinator. Some have male and female on the same plant and can be self-pollinating, but some have perfect flowers and can't. So you may have seen, if you've ever thought to buy a fruit tree, it's say you need another one For good pollination, you need another one that blooms at the same time. Apples, peaches, even sometimes blueberries. And that's because there's a block against this flower pollinating itself. There's a chemical block or a timing block where the male and the female parts of the flowers ripen at a different time. The issue, though, is that that block extends to another flower on this same tree, and named trees are clones of each other. They were not bred separately. They were created by cloning, by cuttings. So there is only one Macintosh apple in the world. And every Macintosh that now exists is a clone of that one. So just as there's a genetic block against that first Macintosh fertilizing itself, that block extends to that Macintosh fertilizing another Macintosh. It's not 100% block, but it's a substantial block enough that it makes sense to have multiple cultivars. With apples, it almost doesn't matter because there's so many crab apples and little wildlings out there that something is bound to pollinate this apple. But if you ever go into an orchard, you'll see they have long strips of different kinds of apple trees. They don't have this giant block of Macintosh. They have a strip of Macintosh and then a strip of honey crisp. And the idea is that the bees go back and forth. And then some have male and female on separate plants. You need both, and only the female can make the seeds, like the ones listed there. Jack in the Pulpit is kind of interesting because it can change gender from one year to the next. Being male, this is not me attacking men this time, but being male in the plant world takes less energy than being female because the male makes pollen and it's done. The female makes ovules, about the same amount of work. But then when the ovules get fertilized, it needs to ripen them off and then put fruit around them. So a Jack in the Pulpit will come up and it'll be male, it'll make male flowers for a while and save up energy. And then one year it has enough energy, it'll be female. And ideally will make fruit and exhaust itself and then go back to being male again. In your garden, you can coax it into being both all the time because of compost. You can give it a really rich environment to live on. So it always has that energy. But if you're thinking of collecting seeds in the wild and you see a Jack in the Pulpit and say, I'll get it next year it may not make seeds. It might be male. And then there are some plants that can generate fruit without being fertilized, but those won't have viable seeds. Those are called parthenocarpic. And there are some cucumbers that will make seeds without being pollinated. The reason we don't grow more of them is they aren't as robust. They don't produce as much as the ones that do require fertilization. I've grown them, they're fine. So this is how a dandelion works. A dandelion is a whole bunch of flowers in one. That's on the right picture. That's what a dandelion flower looks like. And the style comes out of the middle of the anther and picks up pollen on its outside. And the stigma opens up and waits for foreign pollen to come in. And if it does within a day, great, it's outsourced its genetics. It's gotten a nice mix. But if it doesn't, that stigma curls around and is sort of licks some pollen off of the outside of the style, and it gets pollinated that way. So it can go either way. Tomatoes are sometimes self-pollinating and sometimes less so. So a tomato has this fused stamen all the way around the female bits with pollen on the inside. And with some of them, The stigma is inserted. It's actually set back from the outside of that cone. With some, it's dead level with the outside of that cone. And with some, like in the right picture, it sticks out. So the way these get pollinated is a bumblebee. It has to be a bumblebee, grabs hold of the flower and buzzes it at a specific frequency that shakes loose the pollen, which falls out of that cone past the stigma. Some of it sticks, and the bee gets the rest. If you have an inserted stigma, the only way you're getting pollen on that is from that flower. But if you have an exserted stigma, it can also pick up pollen from the bee's belly. So that can cross-pollinate where the one on the right can't. And lacking a bumblebee, if you're doing this in your living room, you can also use an electric toothbrush. It's about the right frequency. Squash have male and female flowers on the same plant. And that's a picture of a male on the left and a female on the right. Every few years, the master gardeners get phone calls saying, my squash is covered with flowers. I've got lots of pollinators. I have no fruit. What is going on? And the answer is often this. I'm going to get the numbers a little wrong. There is a trait in some squash where if the nighttime temperature is above 85 degrees for 5 days running during the developmental phase of the squash, it doesn't make female flowers. If it doesn't make female flowers, it's not going to make fruit, but it'll be covered with male flowers. What farmers do about this, if they want to grow that kind of squash, is they plant their squash and then 2 weeks later they plant more squash with the idea that they're not going to get that bad week twice in a row, exactly 2 weeks apart. So now that you have fertilized the flower, you need to let the seeds develop until they're ripe. Ripe means something different to farmers and to botanists. Ripe to I'm sorry, and to cooks. Cooks, ripe means it tastes good. Botanists, growers, ripe means the seed is adult, has matured. A green bell pepper is not ripe. A red bell pepper is. You have to wait until it's changed color. That's part of the reason why the red ones are more expensive. They're on the plant longer. It takes longer to produce the ripe fruit. And also the plant is going to produce fewer of them because it's trying to mature some seeds. And once it's matured enough of them, it stops. So red bell peppers are ripe. Summer squash, the way we eat it, is not ripe. The seeds are small, flat, easily chewed things. The picture on the right, which looks a lot more like a winter squash, is what a yellow squash looks like when it's ripe. The only time we eat ripe peas is in split pea soup. Old-fashioned tomatoes were ripe when they're red. It's harder to tell now with things like green zebra tomatoes that ripen green, but there's still a difference. When a sunflower seed is ripe and you try to push your fingernail through it, it just doesn't go. It sort of splinters. It's got a real shell on it. I threw the cleome in the middle there, not food, but still. It makes these pods. The flower keeps growing up the stem. When it started blooming, it was blooming way at the bottom of the picture, and it keeps making more flowers and making more seeds below it. And the seeds are in these pods. And I would guess absolutely none of them at this point are ripe. They're green, they're white. Once the seeds are ripe, they turn brown and they have a shell. And with a lot of plants, though not all of them, that's a really good cue that the seed is ripe. It changes color and it also plumps up. We eat winter squash ripe. We eat pumpkins ripe. They have big seeds that have some substance to them, and they're fat. To get seeds that breed true, you need the plant to be open pollinated, not a hybrid and not a clone. A lot of the things that are sold as annuals nowadays are cloned. They're not bred from seed. Or they may be, the first plant was, but most of them after that were cloned. You need it to breed within that cultivar, and you need a large enough population to prevent inbreeding depression. So I said enough separation. From what? The from what is from other things in that species. So this is the whole or a lot of the taxonomy of squash. It's worth knowing from family on down. So this is called a cucurbit, along with all squash, cucumbers, melons, all of those things. And when we're rotating crops, we rotate by family. You don't put the, it doesn't work in this. You put the cucurbits where the solanaceous were. You put eggplants where squash were. You don't put melons where squash were. You have to go up a level. The genus is Cucurbita. The species is four that we eat mostly: Cucurbita maxima, mixta, moschata, and pepo. And the vast majority of summer squash are Cucurbita pepo. Every squash here is a Cucurbita pepo, which means every squash here is genetically compatible with every other one. The bees don't know the difference, and they will cheerfully bop back and forth between these, cross-pollinating your yellow crookneck squash with your acorn squash. So if these plants are growing close enough together, there is no reason to believe they will breed true because they cross-pollinated. What is close enough together? Oh, sorry, I almost forget I have this slide in there. You can't tell by looking at them. These I would all call pumpkins, but they're four different species. You can grow them on top of each other and they will not cross-pollinate. So how close together? Well, for squash, it's 800 feet to half a mile. That's how far the bees will go. So even if all you're growing is yellow crookneck squash, if your neighbors 3 doors down are growing kusa, there's no reason to believe your squash are going to breed true. If you're growing cucumbers, 800 feet to half a mile. If you're growing peas, it's 10 or 20 feet. So there you can just do one end of the garden to the other. But for so many of these, it's a huge difference. And that really puts a crimp in our desire to save seeds from cultivars. Does this matter? Maybe, maybe not. So again, it's not just the cucurbits. Everyone here is a Brassica oleracea. They can all cross-pollinate. If you're marketing the seeds as a particular cultivar, call it a brandywine tomato. Yes, it's only a brandywine if both mom and dad were brandywines. If there is a big difference in taste or looks, it matters. The thing with taste is you're not going to know till next year. I recently talked with somebody who had saved seeds from a pepper that she bought in the store, and it came up tasting like nothing. Probably didn't breed within the species. A friend of mine grew saved seeds from a delicata squash, which is the one on the bottom right. When she grew them the next year, they looked like delicata. They didn't taste like it. The ones to watch are squash, peppers, and brassicas, all of the cabbagey things. Peppers are hot and sweet. So if everybody within half a mile is only growing bell peppers, you're fine. But bell peppers and hot peppers can cross pollinate. And you may find when you're eating a bell pepper that you, by mistake, bite into one of the seeds and it's hot. That's because that particular pollen grain came out of a hot pepper. If you're marketing the seeds more generally and just say it's a tomato, maybe it doesn't matter. And if there's relatively little difference in taste or appearance, or you don't care about the appearance, it's going to taste like lettuce. You don't know if it's going to be flat or curly or white or red or green, but it's going to taste like lettuce. Beans are beans. There's some better ones and worse, but any old bean is better than no bean at all. So it may not matter. It may not matter a lot. Now let's talk about actually how to save seeds. Almost. One last thing is there are some plants that, particularly vegetable plants, that we've never seen bloom because they're biennials, which is to say, they don't make seeds until their second year, and we eat them the first year. And those include Brussels sprouts, cabbage, carrots, kale, leeks, and onions. If you plant an onion from the store, if it starts shooting up, you may get a flower. So if you want to save seeds from these, you need to get them through the first winter, and that may require a whole lot of mulch. The next year, they will bolt, they will make flowers, and they will set seeds, if you're lucky. When you're saving seeds, we tend to divide them into dry seed heads and wet seed heads. Dry seed heads are arugula, beets, lettuce, Queen Anne's lace, most of the daisy-like things, asters, they're all dry seed heads. You wait until it ripens. If it's the kind of plant that shatters and just drops its seeds as soon as they turn ripe, or the kind that the birds tend to eat as soon as they turn ripe, you can protect it by putting either a paper bag or a mesh thing made out of cheesecloth around it while it is finishing ripening. It can't be a plastic bag. It needs to be something that breathes a bit. Collect the heads when they're dry, when the seeds turn brown, when the pods break apart, any of those things, and extract the seeds. With something like a sunflower that's got a lot of meat in the head, once it starts turning ripe, like it's half ripe, you can cut it off and hang it upside down. There may be enough energy in that seed head to ripen off the rest of the seeds. But for the most part, once you harvest it, they're not going to get any riper, particularly once you separate the seed from the plant. It's not going to get any riper. So make sure it's ripe when you take it. Then clean it. That's weird. Just pardon me. Left off the slide. So how do you clean these things? With some seed heads, you can just break them apart like that. With a black-eyed Susan head, you just break it apart into separate pieces. Once it's in separate pieces, you're probably going to be left with sort of the head, which you toss, and then a whole bunch of other stuff. And you can keep doing that, breaking it apart until it feels like what you're left with is pretty solid. It's not chaff. It wouldn't blow away. And then you can either pack it all or you can blow away the chaff. Queen Anne's lace, same deal. You can do that with something like that, which isn't as tightly clumped a seed head. You can also put it in a paper bag and just really shake the paper bag. That also works with amaranth love lies bleeding and some of the food amaranths and callaloo and pigweed. You can try shaking the head inside a paper bag, and that'll knock free an awful lot of the seeds. It's not super important that you make sure that only thing being saved is seeds. It's okay if there is some chaff, which is the non-seed part of the seed head. You don't want there to be a lot of chaff, partly because it's harder to store, it's harder to plant ultimately, but also you are going to want to keep the seeds dry. So if there's a lot of biotic stuff in there that's very good at absorbing moisture, like the original seed head or the that nut in the hypanthium, then it's more likely to get moist and it's more likely to rot. Fleshy fruits like tomatoes, you leave the fruit on the plant till it starts getting soft and almost mushy. Cut it out, scoop out the gumph, the guts of the plants. Think tomatoes, think pumpkins. You can either put it through a fermentation process, which I'll talk about next, or not, and then you clean them. The point of fermentation with tomatoes in particular, but other plants as well, is that some plants have a block against the seed germinating immediately. Tomatoes do. So if you were in a greenhouse setting and you wanted to plant these tomato seeds immediately, you'd find that they have very low germination rate. In nature, the tomato hits the ground or something eats it and poops it out, and it goes through this weathering or digestive process, which gets it ready to germinate. We pack them up in fall and plant them in spring, and that works. But if you wanted to start them immediately, then this is how you do it. You put that pulp with the seeds in it into a container with a little bit of water. You cover it with a paper towel or cheesecloth to keep down the fruit flies and the smell. And you set it aside for 3 to 5 days, kind of like a sourdough starter. The yeast is going to get in there and it'll form chemical reactions that break apart the thing that inhibits germination. Skim off the scum and then keep cleaning the seeds. With large seeds, you can do them one at a time in a bowl of water or under running water and just squeeze, not squeeze them, but rub them between your fingers until they don't feel slippery anymore. Spread them out on a paper towel or a tea towel to dry. Second thing with littler seeds is you put them in a bowl with water and you agitate the water, or you put them in a jar with a lid and you agitate the water, and it'll help separate the pulp from the seeds. The seeds are going to sink, the pulp is going to float. So you skim off the whatever floats, maybe strain it off and do it again until it seems clean enough. You don't need every speck of pulp to be off. You need them to be clean enough that you can get them dry and packed and plant them easily. Moisture, light, and heat are what make seeds germinate. Dry, dark, and cold are what help us store seeds. So when the seeds are thoroughly dry, you pack them up. A labeled container, because you are not going to know, and ideally you actually wrote the label when you harvested the fruit. If you put them in a clear jar, Mom used to save a bunch of wildflower seeds in baby food jars, then put in a tissue that'll block some of the light and also absorb any lingering moisture. You can get these little packs of silica gel any place that sells handbags or sneakers or shoes. They put them in the shoe boxes, and the people who try on the shoes just drop them on the floor, and you can pick them up out of the department store, and they'll be happy that you tidied things up. But they dry things out. So You might have a bunch of envelopes of seeds, put them all in a plastic bag, and then throw a pack of silica gel in the plastic bag. Put them in the fridge, not the freezer. Not all of the seeds that we save are winter hardy. I've seen tomatoes that come up from outside, from bad cleanup. So the seed overwintered outside. I've never seen that happen with peppers. And it's not because I clean up the peppers so much better. It's because the pepper seeds do not survive outside. They will not necessarily survive in a freezer. Fridge is much safer. Bring them to room temperature before you unpack them, because, or unpack them really fast and then pack the rest if you're not going to plant them all. What you don't want is for condensation to form on the seeds that you're not about to plant right away. You don't want them to get moist. Some northern seeds, you wonder why northern seeds don't sprout right away. And it's because well, some do. They're called winter annuals. They sprout in fall, they go dormant in winter, they come up in spring, and they fill out their life cycle. But there are some natives in particular that need a cold period before they're willing to germinate. That way, they know they're not germinating before winter, but after winter. And our giving them that cold period is called stratification. Some just need cold, some need cold and moist. If they need cold and moist, one way of doing it is to put the seeds in a plastic bag with moist sand or peat, or a damp, not wet paper towel. If it's wet, they will rot. Store it in the fridge for 1 to 3 months. Bring it out in spring. They will not have germinated, probably. Plant them like you would anyway, and you'll get a much better germination rate. Another way of doing it is planting the seeds outside in fall in the ground, or doing this winter sow thing, which has been described beautifully by the University of Maryland Extension. You take a jug, any kind of a container that's transparent or translucent. It needs to have a hole in the top, and you're going to punch drainage holes in the bottom. You cut it, if you're using a jug like that, you cut it in half, leaving a hinge, and you label it if you care. You put 3 or 4 inches of moist soil, potting soil, in the bottom of the jug. You plant your seeds. You make sure they're nice and moist. And then you close the jug up with duct tape and you put it outside. You leave the cap off. You want water to go in, and you want air exchange, in part because the plants are going to breathe once they come up, but in part because if we get a 70-degree day in February, as we have done, you don't want everything inside the jug to melt. If we get a really warm, dry winter, you may need to water, but mostly you won't have to. In spring, the seeds are gonna sprout. When you think it's safe, you unduct tape the thing and open it up, and you transplant when the seedlings are at least 2 inches tall. So you're gonna look like you're going to look odd because you're going to have all of these milk jugs scattered around your yard, but so what? It works. Water jugs work too. Some natives don't need any winter treatment, any cold treatment. Black-eyed Susan needs no pre-treatment. Ashy sunflower, common milkweed, the yellow column, does better if it spends a month in the fridge, but it doesn't have to be wet. Purple giant hyssop needs 2 months cold and wet. You can't tell by looking at a plant what it needs. Good idea to look it up. I often get asked how long seeds last. We don't know. We have data on how long they last with a high germination rate, and there are lots of tables online. So leeks 1 year, lettuce 5 to 6 years, but that's with a high germination rate. Beans, it says 3 years, but we have germinated beans that we think are over 1,000 years old. Rice isn't on here, but we've germinated a magnolia tree that we think may be older than that, and a date palm that we think is like 2,000 years old. You're not going to get a high germination rate with very old seed, but you may get some. What I would suggest is that if you find a really old seed pack that you just don't care about, that you either throw it out or just throw the seed on the ground and walk away. If you find a really old seed pack that your grandmother gave you the last time you saw her and it really means something to you, who cares if it's 15 years old? Try it. You may get one plant out of it, which would be really cool. Sources on seed saving. Seed Savers Exchange is all about preserving biodiversity and edibles. So they have terrific information on how to save seeds. They're also a source for some weird and wonderful heirlooms that you have never heard of before. How to store seeds and how long they last. Clear Creek Seed used to say they may still or not. A lot of the time now I go to Johnny's. So everybody that sells seeds will also describe how to grow them. The researchers and university people who have reviewed these said a lot of them are wrong, not all the time, but often enough. They haven't found any mistakes in Johnny's. So while you don't have to buy your seed from there, they're a terrific reference source for all things growing and living with seeds. When you're looking at a website, trust.edu first, which is funny because none of these are .edu. .edu is put out by a university. In the olden days, it was put out by a researcher or a professor, and you knew you could trust that that was the latest information. Nowadays, they're so desperate for content that some of it is written by master gardeners, and we're not always that careful, but it's still a good place to go for the truth as we know it today. Check who wrote it, check that it was written recently, last 3 to 5 years, and then go with that. .org is written by a nonprofit, and they have a mission. To the extent that what they say is going to be flavored by that mission. So if you're reading a nativeplants.org, they're never going to recommend that you grow hosta because hosta is not a native plant, or apples. But you know, apples are incredibly important in the environment. They're host to a lot of different insects. So again, look at what they're saying through the lens of their mission. .com is trying to sell you a product or a service, but they may still give you really good information like Johnny's does. How to start and grow most of the common seeds, Johnny's. How to start about 2,500 different plants from collection through germination, Norman C. Deno. This is a book that is available only online for free as a downloadable PDF. It is not the latest and greatest information. It was written in the 80s, but it is the most consolidated information. Still worth going to. And what it is a recipe book, because there are some plants that you throw the seed on the ground and they come up. There's some they need to be cold and wet for 2 months, but there's some that need to be warm and then cold and then warm and then cold and then cold and wet, and then they'll come up. And he has all of those recipes in there, from how do you harvest the seed, prep it, plant it, the whole thing. When you're doing vegetables, Robin's Farm Garden has a great schedule that they publish online every year. So if you want to know when to start your broccoli, it's in there. Cornell Home Growing and New England Vegetable Org are both listed here, so I'll tell you about that in a minute. All American Selections and Missouri Botanical Garden are great sources in general, not a lot to do with seed saving. I've talked about Seed Savers Exchange. I want to talk about these last two and then the next slide, and then I'm done. So one question that comes up a lot is what should I save seeds of or what should I grow? If you are interested in supporting the environment, the Bee Ecology project focused on pollinators that are in trouble, which isn't all of the pollinators. There are some bumblebees in New England whose population is larger than it's ever been before, but there are some that are in serious decline, and they tend to eat different things. So Beecology will tell you what to plant to support the pollinators that are in trouble in New England. Doug Tallamy looked at the rest of the environment, concluded, among other things, that for a chickadee to raise 5 babies from egg to adulthood, it needs to feed them between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars. And those caterpillars need to eat something. Those things are called host plants. Some plants are much more attractive to caterpillars than others, to butterflies. And he studied which plants those are and called them the keystone species, the ones where they are the biggest source of food. If all of the oaks in Massachusetts went away, the ecology would crash, songbirds would vanish. It is the big keystone plant. But beyond that, there are two yellow daisies, a helianthus and a heliopsis. They're both yellow daisies. The heliopsis is host to one butterfly species. The helianthus is host to 28. So if I'm going to grow one or the other, I'm going to grow the helianthus. It helps the environment. It keeps songbirds around. Cornell Vegetable Growing Guide is a great source for homeowners on how to grow vegetables. New England Vegetable Management Guides is a great source for farmers on how to grow vegetables. So daunting to beginners, but a lot more information once you start getting some expertise. Good places to go, and they will also suggest cultivars to grow. I'm going to go look and see if there are any questions. There are at least 3. Screen share, got that. Okay, super. Nothing for me. So if anybody has any questions, I'd suggest you unmute and sing them out.
Thank you, Gretel. This was great. This is Chrissy. I have a question. And I know you provided resources for us to go and find this, but if you were to just give us like the quick opinion, if I wanted to get into seed saving for like a novice seed saver, what is the first kind of thing that you would recommend attempting to seed save?
If you are growing flowers, I'd go with things like Queen Anne's lace and all of the daisy-like things that grow around. If you are going for vegetables, I'd do beans and peas. In part because they don't pollinate from afar, and in part because if they do crossbreed, so what?
Those ones we should let fully like dry up on the vine.
Yeah. So what you can do with the beans, for example, is designate one or two really good looking beans and say, I'm bean plants, and say, I'm not going to pick those. I'm going to wait until they get really big and fat and gnarly looking, and then I'm going to pick them and even dry out. If you don't have that many bean plants, then at some point in the season, you stop harvesting. Or you leave 3 bean plants on the plants and you just don't harvest those and you let them completely develop.
Thank you. Do we have
You're
more
welcome.
questions?
Fun one. So impatience. You know how they have this springy, boingy thing? I, as a kid, used to love popping those open.
Yeah,
But can you save and reuse those?
yeah. So impatiens around here is jewelweed as much as anything. And they have those little pods that go bang. So you look at the pod and you wait until it looks dark through it, because that means the seed has turned black, and then you do that. Because it'll explode, but it'll explode in your hand. And then same thing, you have now dry seeds and you can scatter them out and let them dry for a few days. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions? You're welcome. So if anything occurs to you in the next day or so, if you let the powers let Chrissy know, she'll forward them to me and I'll get back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Gretel. This was really informative. I learned a lot tonight, and I do flowers and vegetables, so I'm excited to try my hand at both. As Gretel said, if anybody comes up with anything, I can certainly forward any questions and facilitate that connection. And I've done the recording, so I'll have that for the membership, and the slides I will send out to the membership as well.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate the audience.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thanks so much.
Welcome.